Welcome to Intangibles, a podcast about traits, behaviors, and qualities that entrepreneurs can cultivate to help them be successful. I'm your host, Steve BERG. I'm a partner at a New York City-based venture capital fund called Lytical Ventures. Season 4 is brought to you by Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Also, please find Intangibles on the web at www.intangiblespodcast.com. Today's topic, for the second time on the podcast, is curiosity. As I've explored the different intangible qualities out there, I've learned that curiosity is tied to so many other skills, and I thought it was worthwhile to explore it further. Or, as Walt Disney would say, we keep moving forward, opening new doors, and doing new things, because we're curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. Helping me explore a new path today is Dr. Todd Kashdan. Dr. Kashdan is a professor of clinical psychology and senior scientist at George Mason University's Center for the Advancement of Well-Being. He has published over 185 peer-reviewed journal articles and written a number of books. His most recent book is called The Upside of Your Dark Side. But today we're going to talk about one of his earlier works, Curious: Discover the Missing Ingredient to a Fulfilling Life. He is a scientific advisor for Time Inc., National Geographic, and Merck. He's a prolific speaker. A fun fact about him is that he has twin daughters, and he himself is a twin. Hello, Dr. Kashdan. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me this morning.
Anything that I should have added to your bio and didn't?
You covered some of the interesting threads.
Okay, good. So we always ask for a definition of curiosity, but I think I'm going to dispense with that for the moment and jump right to the story of how you became the best shot putter in the history of your high school up until the time that you graduated.
Oh, you do your homework. That's pretty impressive.
Let's talk about that. I love that story.
I think the audience needs a visual that I was about $130 at the time that I was a shot putter. So I tried every sport imaginable that a boy who wants to be a man is supposed to. So I tried wrestling, tried football, tried lacrosse, sucked at everything. And then I realized that maybe my ticket is throwing a 12-pound metallic ball as far as humanly possible. We did not have a coach on my middle school team or my high school team. And so what I did was you got to go back into the 90s now to kind of put this into context, is I did a mail order for frame-by-frame photos of Austrian and German shot putters who were the best in the world at the time in the Olympics. And on my wall was the biomechanics of how they actually moved. No YouTube, no DVDs to watch. And so I basically just mimicked their actions and bought myself a shot put with Sports Authority, which was going bankrupt. And I would go onto a soccer field at about 7:00 at night every single day. And I'd have all the frame-by-frame photos on the ground. And I would just practice for hours and hours each day as all my friends would drive by and watch me. And then over the course of 3 years from being absolutely horrendous, I ended up getting a college scholarship by the time I graduated high school. It's a good, I like to tell my 11-year-old daughters about the story because it's just a good example of that you can get your mentors anywhere. For me, it was just random track and field athletes from different countries who I was just downloading pictures of. And then at the same time there's a level of effort and interest that nobody controls except for yourself that can make you very ambitious and able to accomplish some pretty high lifting goals.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about it, right? Is there's some impediments here. And those impediments, they didn't, in your case, in this story, they didn't act as barriers. They actually acted as drivers, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, part of the appeal of how I live my life pre-scientist and post-scientist is I like to zig when other people zag. And so you don't win girlfriends by doing shot put, and there's definitely not a crowd cheering for you when you're throwing a metallic ball. but there's something appealing of the fact of here's this sport of without steroids and supplements, what can your body possibly do at its maximum capacity was just an incredibly appealing sport that other people just don't find as fascinating as I do.
Right. The whole notion that there's no coach, there's no nothing, and you're like, well, of course, that's not that because of that, in spite of that, you're like, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Right.
The other thing that struck me about that story as I was, thinking it through is this is really novel, right? It wasn't something that most people do. As far as I can remember, it wasn't even something you knew anything about prior to even going after it, right? So, I mean, the experience associated with a novel event, I think that in general, that ripples through people's lives. Did that ripple through your life into the future?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, there are many times that I've spoken at organizations and someone asked me during the Q&A afterwards of like, what is the origin of you being interested in curiosity, creativity, and how to form healthy relationships and meaning and purpose in life? And honestly, this is one of the threads, which was this interest right here and realizing like following your interests, but not necessarily your passions, right? Interest precedes passions, was one of the early harbingers of like, okay, listen, you don't have to follow what the crowd is doing and what the herd is doing and what the status quo is doing. All rules are simply questions that haven't been asked, which is who made the rules, why are they there, and would it be better if they were broken and disabled? And if you go through life with those kind of questions, I mean, it's one of the ways, the shortcuts for being creative and influential in a world where everyone's looking to kind of make some kind of placement for themselves where they stand out a little bit.
Yeah, you found this intersection of interest and meaning, and maybe you stumbled upon it, maybe you didn't, but being able to, one, capture that, and then two, use that almost as an example or a blueprint of other things that you might do in your life. That's pretty meaningful. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, there's another element as well, right? You have another piece is you don't go through this alone, right? There's the myth of the lone creator, the myth of the lone genius, which is, an undefinable made up word. But in their story is a bunch of friends and a girlfriend or two who just like adored the fact that I was the lone person obsessed with track and field, right? In a junior high school and a high school that basically puts basketball players and football players on a pedestal, the willingness to go outside the grain, you'll find that a large minority of people find it attractive and interesting. And it leads to, the biggest mantra of advice that I give my kids as they go to school, and the advice I give to kids that are just starting college or high school or a new job, which is everyone tries to make themselves interesting. But if you can be interested, this is like seductive rule number 3, right? Because everyone is focused on themselves. And if you ask questions and start exploring new territory and find what charges other people up, I mean, you're just going to skip rungs of intimacy vastly faster than whoever has the better car, the better travel schedule, and the better background in terms of books that they read, taking interest in other people. Kind of that's where the jam is.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that I was I won't stay on the story for too much longer, but the reason I was really drawn to it is because this felt like a microcosm to me. A statement on the fact that we need to connect what we do to our values. And by the way, this is not, in my mind, this is not dissimilar to how entrepreneurs should go about figuring out what business they should get into, right? They should, take their interests, take those values, take that novelty as the drivers for, the imagination and putting their finger on what they need to do.
Yeah, I would add one more supplement. I agree with everything you're saying to that statement for entrepreneurs, which is in those early phases, right? So for, if we keep with the same kind of metaphor of me learning how to play shot put, do shot put, I don't know what the actual verb is. It's anxiety provoking in the beginning. you don't know what you're doing. Like it's failure incarnate, because it is hard to even imagine how many steps it'll take to acquire some level of success where you'll actually get a medal, do well, receive praise for accomplishing something. And so it's a good thing to remember is that as you're following things that intrigue you, and as you're following, using curiosity as a compass, expect that the unknown, the unfamiliar, the ambiguous, the mysterious is going to be anxiety provoking. And the natural response from millions of years of evolution is, in that situation, take a step backwards and do something else that is more safe and more comfortable. And what I would say is spend a good chunk of time where you feel anxious, because normally we feel anxious because we think something's interesting, we think it's potentially meaningful, but I'm not quite sure if I'm competent, I'm intelligent, and if I could do this. That dialectic of holding this concern about, this doubt about my ability, and this wonder about these possibilities, if you feel both of those things simultaneously, normally that's a place where amazing things could happen, and at the worst, you have an amazing story to tell at the bar of how things failed miserably.
Yeah, courage, right? That's the element that you're talking about. I saw something. I'm not sure which Google founder it was. Maybe it was Sergey, and he was saying, if you feel like a worm on a sidewalk during a rainstorm, you're probably on the right path.
No, that's great. I mean, my co-author Robert Biswas-Diener has a great definition of courage, which has two parts, and it's important to remember the second part. It's the willingness to take action despite the presence of fear. And I think when we think about our paragons of bravery and valor and courage, we imagine, Navy SEALs, going in fearless, snipers in places where there's genocide, where their heart rate is about 85, despite the fact that they could be shot down at any point in time. We think of firefighters, we think of EMT workers, we think of inner city teachers that are dealing with disruptive children, and there's no anxiety whatsoever. If you're not anxious, you don't get to claim courage. So it's only in the face of anxiety you're willing to take a step forward. Then you have yourself the experience of courage.
I like it. Okay, so I think now is the time that we could finally interject or at least your working definition of curiosity and some parameters around it. When you endeavored to write the book, you had to kind of create a framework in your mind, right? I assume. So how do you think of curiosity?
Well, I'll tell you about stuff. So the book is a few years old, and we actually we haven't published it yet. We just published an article in this month's Harvard Business Review of our 5-dimensional model of curiosity, which is brand new. If you had to think about curiosity at a broad level, we all know what it is. I mean, this is the Oxford English Dictionary definition, which is the desire to seek out new information and experiences. And I've always felt that didn't capture the comprehensive bandwidth of what it is like to be curious, to see people that are curious, and to look at curious people. And so we dissected thousands of employees in China and Germany and the United States, and we uncovered 4 different dimensions in the context of work, where people that capture a profile of a curious person. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you want me to walk you through. Yeah.
Is this intensity, frequency, durability, breadth, depth? Is that the one, or have you come?
No.
Oh, we've got. Well, totally, I do, absolutely. But I'm going to be in the deep end of the pool, so you're going to have to help me a little bit more then.
Yeah. So this has never been shared publicly until right now. So this is curiosity in the workplace, and it'll be, you can find it on newsstands probably next week. So the first dimension is pretty much the je ne sais quoi of curiosity. And if you think of, listen to podcasts, TED speakers, when they talk about curiosity, they're talking about what I call joyous exploration. And that is this general, you find the world interesting. There's appeal and intrigue everywhere. You're talking about the naturalist who's walking around the world and then just getting on their knees and picking up an ant, and they're noticing the fact that this one has 6 legs as opposed to 4 legs, and it's got 6 segments as opposed to 3 segments, and they're intrigued by everything around them. It's when the good old days when there are bookstores that you can go on a date to, and you wouldn't go there just to find a David Foster Wallace book. You would actually wander through the stacks and see, the people that work there. What are the recommendations? And just certain titles, certain colors, certain authors. You just pick up the book and read the back and turn to page 99 and look at it, and you would spend hours wandering around. That's joyous exploration. It's just a pleasurable experience to recognize how much novelty there is in the world. The other dimension has a very different emotional element to it, and we call it deprivation sensitivity, which sounds jargony, but I'll explain why it's actually a useful term. And this is about, you're curious because you feel there's a gap between what you know and what you want to know, and it's anxiety provoking until you're able to fill the hole. And so in this case, if you use the same bookstore example, you're not wandering through the store, serendipitously bumping into authors and books you would never, ever pick up by looking online. This is about, you are seeking a particular book because you want to know something. You want to know, is it true that that George Washington, the cherry tree incident was real? What is the actual origin of Al Qaeda? Is it true that teenagers and 20-somethings that anxiety is on the rise and it's a higher rate than ever is before? I want to see a book whether or not this is actually true and what to do about it. You're there on a mission. You're still curious, but you have a very clear objective that you're trying, in terms of information that you're trying to uncover. And so if you think about this in the context of work, if you were to look at someone that's high in deprivation sensitivity, they don't look intrigued and excited. They look anxious and worried because they have a problem they want to solve. It's clear, and they want to plug that hole, and everything that gets in their way is freaking annoying as hell. So it's a very different emotional experience than joyous exploration.
So it's an itch that has to be scratched. Is it? It probably isn't, actually, as I think about it. It's not the same as need for cognition, is it?
No, need for cognition is a term that John Cacioppo, who unfortunately died last year, he came up with, which is basically the desire for complex informational experiences. And so, people that would listen to a podcast such as yours, they're probably high on need for cognition. If you read Wired magazine, you're probably high on need for cognition. And if you like, I hate to use an example because someone's going to yell at me online, but if you watch Real Housewives of insert blank city, and that's the kind of thing that you like, that's high quality entertainment for you, you're probably lower on need for cognition. It's not good or bad. We need a little bit of both types of people to kind of, to fill out every social environment and party situation and, and workplace and household. So that's a little bit different. Deprivation sensitivity is actually, you could think of it as a moment where there's a gap between what you know and what you want to know, and some people just have these experiences more often and more intensely, and we would say they are high in deprivation sensitivity as a trait, as a personality trait.
It occurs to me that as an investor, I should be looking for founders that have a high degree of deprivation sensitivity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. That's the beauty of this model. So we went through 2 dimensions. The beauty of this model is there are particular profiles that are better than others depending on what you're looking for. That's exactly right. So if you're thinking about someone that you want to invest in, I want someone that's going to not only be good at problem solving, but actually has a real strong craving to seek holes in information that other people don't even know that they're present. And it bugs them. It annoys them. They are restless. Sometimes it interferes with their sleep. And they're waking up the next day and they want to be the first one to talk to people, to seek it, to explore the library databases, go online and kind of read through scientific articles. I want someone that looks for not just the exact information that will help them, but things on the periphery that are tangentially related, because they might find a creative solution by doing that. And that's exactly right. That claristic is related to the desire to be creative and innovative, and not for public claim, but because I want to find a better way of doing things than everyone else is doing.
Yeah. Dissatisfaction with the status quo.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 2. We've got 3 more, right?
Yeah. So for in the workplace, there's 4, and in general in life, there's 5.
Okay.
So the other 2 dimensions at work are, to me, what I think is the most important and neglected dimension. It's the reason I went into this field or in my 20th year of studying curiosity, is this dimension. So let me backtrack my way into this. When we think about the definition of curiosity, and we think about when other people are curious and when we're intrigued, we tend to think about the desire for novelty, complexity, challenge, ambiguity, volatility. There's like a lust for the new. What we forget is that that's only half of the puzzle. The other part is, if I'm exposed to this novelty, complexity, ambiguity, and mysteriousness, do I believe I can handle? Do I believe I can manage the anxiety of confronting the new? Because the new, by definition, is going to be a little bit anxiety provoking. Before this podcast, we talked about that. You went whitewater rafting in Colorado, and so with those kind of vacations, you never know Mother Nature, like what the water is actually going to be like. No matter what your guide says, the water is different every single day of the year, and so there's a little bit of anxiety of, can we actually handle this? Can I protect my partner and my kids? So there's an element of worry in there, and the belief that you can manage the anxiety of the new is what we call stress tolerance. And it's a fundamental element of being curious. If you are high in the ability to uncover the new, and if you are high in the belief that you can handle the new if you're exposed to it, then and only then can we say that you're curious in this moment. If you find novelty, but you don't think you can handle it, you would be in a state what we'd call is either confused or terrified or worried, as opposed to feeling this thing that we call being curious.
The reason that I find that so interesting, and I typically despise the word interesting because I think most of the time people mean novel when they say interesting, is because novelty, I've always thought, was the human driver for progress. The thing, like our dissatisfaction with the status quo, our desire to experience the new, the novelty. I thought that was the propulsive force. And you're saying, wait a minute, it might be. But there's a whole bunch of people out there that might be like, nope, just a little too much excitement for me today. Think I'll pass.
Yeah. I mean, I just went to Japan for 10 days with my 11-year-old daughter. It was their first international trip. And as soon as we were in the hotel that night, she was crying. And she was like, this is so confusing and I'm homesick. And it was too much novelty. I mean, there's not when you see Japanese as someone who's from New York for the first time and you're 11 years old, yep, and you don't know any of the languages, you can't understand anything. It's completely overwhelming. Yep. Does she recognize there's novelty? Of course. But she could not take a step forward and approach and explore and seek things out and dissect things until I was able to kind of work her through of like, you have more coping abilities than you think you do, and walked her through all the situations in her life where she's gone to class the very first day of school and didn't know anybody. We moved once, so she transferred to a different school, and the same thing, the novelty was overwhelming, and yet she made tons of friends. And when she first did soccer, and so by doing this, by the next day, what I did was an intervention, which was, let me take an inventory of all the moments where you're exposed to intense novelty with very low skill levels, and yet still you got through the early stages where it felt unmanageable, and you ended up functioning at an extremely high level. And from that, reminding yourself of all the times that you were able to be courageous and explore despite the presence of fear, it allows you to then to end up being more approach as opposed to avoidance oriented when you walk out there. And that intervention, is one of the reasons where I ended up being, an amazing trip over 10 days. It's like, listen, let's just honor the fact. This is crazy. This, culture shock. It is crazy to walk into Japan and find that, people have hedgehogs as pets and you have 6th-floor arcades and it's overwhelming and people smoke everywhere and people have strange hair and people speak a strange language. And yet at the same time, that's exactly why it's such a fascinating, cool experience.
I can totally relate. I took my son, who's 9, just not too much younger than your daughter, to his first rock concert this summer.
Oh, what band?
Saw U2 at the Garden.
Good.
And
nice.
That's a like a lot of visual stimulus, and he's never been to a venue that size, and the crowd roars, and the band comes on, and for the first 10 minutes he's just shaking, and he's not quite sure why. I mean, he's just literally vibrating, and he's looking at me like, "Dad, what's going on?" And I'm like, "Are you all right?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm okay, but I don't know why. I don't know what's going on." And I think this is exactly what you're talking about. This is the anxiety associated with the massive amount of novelty that he was experiencing.
Yeah, by the way, amazing first concert, because he's going to be asked that question for the next 60 years. So that's well done in terms of dad. Like we screw up a lot, but that's a very good dad moment. You did good.
All right. Thanks, man.
You too.
So, all right, was that 3 or 4?
So that's 3.
Okay.
And then the 4th one, which ends up, so we predict innovation at work, satisfaction with work, problem solving at work, commitment to work, developing good relationships with coworkers and supervisors. One of the final dimension has some of the strongest relationships. And I want to tell you off the bat, it is not social intelligence. It is openness to people's ideas. And it's the idea of right now, the zeitgeist of the business world is a real big push for diversity. And that's a good thing, right? The idea of, is there enough women in Silicon Valley? More importantly, is the culture conducive to having women in this bro culture in Silicon Valley? Do we have enough people that are non-white, that are in the business world as entrepreneurs, CEOs, so that young people can actually see themselves, the possibility that they can actually accomplish amazing things? But yet, if you look at the scientific research, I'll call this surface level diversity, right? What you can see. So we're talking about gender, we're talking about age, we're talking about race, ethnicity. These things are very poor at predicting innovation in the workplace, or even like really healthy teams where the sum of the parts is greater than the individual contributions. What you find is better than surface level diversity is cognitive diversity, which is that basically, you and I, Steve, no matter how much we get along, no matter the fact that both of us are from New York, the thing is we have read different books, we have talked to different people, we have had different lovers, we've had different jobs, we've been exposed to, different foods and Netflix movies and life stressors and life accomplishments. And over the course of time, we have had different perspectives that we bring into every situation, restaurants, conversations, business dealings. Tapping into that cognitive diversity is a much stronger predictor of innovative and effective groups and innovative and effective organizations. And so this dimension of curiosity is, to what degree are you open, receptive, and seeking out different vantage points, different people's viewpoints to acquire new information and experiences?
Yeah.
And so it's a very directed dimension, which cannot be explained by joyous exploration, deprivation sensitivity, and stress tolerance.
Yeah. It seems like the willingness to engage, right? And that gets to the notion that, what you think, what you perceive might be wrong, right? And so the willing to take in a new idea, to test it against your hypothesis, I think that's a portion of curiosity that, people, that's like pushing the science forward in my mind, because people don't talk about that kind of cognitive process that's happening when new things come into the equation. I want to do, because I've got specifically you, I'm going to do just a quick aside. Would you give a sentence or two about how dopamine is triggered by novelty in the brain?
Sure. With that being said, I don't think this is much of an aid to your audience and people on the planet. But so dopamine tends to be misinterpreted as something that is the neurotransmitter that arises when we experience pleasure. That is completely wrong. Colin DeYoung and a bunch of other scientists, Ken Berridge at Stanford, Brian Knudsen at Emory, have shown that we experience dopamine when we are engaged and exploring new territory. So this neurotransmitter is activated actually in the anticipation of seeking out new information and experiences. So to some degree, we can say that this neurotransmitter is tied to exploratory behavior. Mm-hmm. But I say this very seriously, which is that I do believe that the neuroscientific work is useful for scientists, but I get my skeptic radar always goes up as a scientist when people use a neuropsychological information to explain why people are successful, ambitious, creative, problem-solving, intelligent, good lovers, good parents, or any complicated human behavior.
So you're saying I might be out over my skis if I were to say that curiosity is a gateway drug?
I wouldn't use the term, and it's not because I'm against drugs, but that's a separate conversation.
I'm just kidding. Okay. Let's see. So one of the insights that I have after reading research and studying curiosity is that it actually is a function of, one, being mindful. You were talking about the bug with 6 legs instead of 5, and 2, being deliberate. So, if one chooses volitional consciousness over rote behavior, it seems that you cannot help but being curious. I was wondering if I don't know if that's new to you or not, but I was wondering how that strikes you.
Yeah, so let me take that from 2 different angles. Again, this has never been shared publicly before because we have not submitted this science for peer review yet. We just found that when you predict in the workplace, innovation, satisfaction, commitment, social relationships, productivity, being approach-oriented, being exploratory, being goal-oriented, being ambitious, and also being engaged, right? In terms of dedicated to your work, absorbed in your work, every single one of those dimensions that I said, we pitted in basically a mixed martial arts octagon, curiosity versus mindfulness, and curiosity predicts every single one of them. Once you pit them against each other, mindfulness doesn't predict any of them. Now, I think this is interesting and a real valuable contribution because everybody is talking about mindfulness as the panacea for all of life's woes and possibilities. And this is the first data to actually test against each other. And you find that curiosity actually is the jam in comparison. So they're not the same thing. Right. And I love your description of volitional consciousness, volition being the key word is, if you grabbed 100 people and asked them, what is your fundamental objective in life, probably 80 to 90% of them would say to be happy. And when that happens, I normally say is I don't want to be too mean here, but I think you picked the wrong life objective because you can't just make yourself happy. There's no thermostat for happiness where if you want to be happy, just turn that frown upside down and whatever other crappy colloquialism you can come with. But curiosity is something that volitionally you can say, I am going to mentally, be more engaged, attentive, and focused on what is unfamiliar in the seemingly familiar situation that I'm in. We can direct our attention like a laser to be more open and receptive to someone that's disagreeing with us. We can actually change in the moment and volitionally to decide that I'm going to be less defensive and more open and receptive. It does not mean I'm going to agree with you. It does not mean that I'm going to walk away being best friends with you. It means that I am going to, with great ardor, listen to what you're saying, ask questions, and then consider your perspective. And then afterwards, might just commit to, what I said, what I was thinking before we ever met that happened there. And I think that this directed attention is a fundamental kind of component of being curious. And it's a little bit different than mindfulness, because mindfulness is about being unattached to any particular thought, feeling, or sensation, where curiosity is about a real kind of driver to seek out the new, the unfamiliar, and the things that are mere possibilities.
Sure. So I know we haven't talked about it yet, but in studying the things that you've written about this, you talk about starting a curiosity practice, right? As a way to increase your level of curiosity. Maybe it's a good time to explain what it is. Tell us a little bit about it, how people can start one.
Sure. The thing about curiosity is, every psychological strength that you want to develop, right? You mentioned earlier, in this podcast about, we talked about it before the podcast. You got willpower, you have courage, you might have compassion, you might want to be more creative. Whatever psychological strength you want to develop, the muscle metaphor works really well, which is, in general, you need to make a habit, a regular, consistent practice of behaving that way. And that is really the intervention of how to develop this capacity to be more frequent, regular, and easily accessible in your everyday lives. And so for curiosity, I've been teaching classes on the science of well-being now for 20 freaking years. And I often give them a ton of assignments of what I want you to do. For example, is I want you to go out and be first and go meet 3 new people. And I want you to ask them about, create 10 questions about kind of what their thoughts are about politics in the US, about if there was any other country where they want to live, if there's any time period that they think that they would function best compared to the present, what time period do you think that with their personality they would function best, and a whole bunch of other kind of very unusual questions. And ask 3 different people, 3 strangers, the same questions. And what it is when they come back and they talk about their experiences, a lot of them describe a lot of anxiety, right? Gets back to that stress tolerance element of curiosity. And then a lot of them talk about is that my preconceived notions about how they appeared and what they were like were completely off. And this is exactly what I wanted them to experience, which is that we have templates, we have stereotypes about what someone is like if they're walking around with a Pixies shirt and they have dreadlocks, of what someone is like if they're dressed in, a traditional African regalia, what someone is like if they're in a business suit. We've carried around so many movies and so many book characters over the course of our lives that we need to break out of these caricatures that we walk around with. And one of the ways of doing that is strategically seeking out new experiences and consolidating them. And so by part of this element, part of it is actually having the conversations, but the second part is just as important. Whether it's writing it in a journal or talking about it in class, they're consolidating their experiences about, all right, I don't quite make sense of this yet, but I've realized that the person that on surface appearance who I thought would be most dislike me ended up I had the most commonalities with, we had the best conversation and the fewest pauses, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. And when someone says that to me about they're still unsure about it and they're still working on it, that is the best predictor that they're actually going to learn and grow.
Mm-hmm.
The worst, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say that the worst predictor is when people say that they found the answer, because now there's closure. I want to actually have the open-ended aspect, which is that you're not done learning. I'm not done learning yet.
I was only going to say, it seems like you're describing something called beginner's mind.
Yeah, that's right.
So for people who don't know, beginner's mind is when you consciously look at something with fresh eyes, and what you may find are things that have been overlooked or misunderstood or had preconceived notions attached to them, right? You just remove all that, which, I don't know. As I think about it, maybe when I asked the question about being mindful, it wasn't as much about mindfulness. It was as, talking about this notion of beginner's mind, right? Being aware of, the stimulus that you're receiving. Anyway.
Right. No. Agreed. I mean, Arthur Aaron at Stony Brook University, right near you, he did this 9-year study about people that are in romantic relationships for at least 11 years. And what he found was the best predictor of, and anyone who's in the audience who has in a relationship for more than 5 years knows it is really hard to maintain passion in long-term relationships, especially if you have kids, is the best predictor of passion and satisfaction in long-term relationships is not how much you argue. It's not about finances. It's not about, whether there's issues, whether the family relationships are well. It's boredom. It's people. The degree to which you believe that you are bored in your relationship is the best predictor of the quality of your relationship 9 years later. Now, if you were to break that down, you get really close to what you were just talking about beginner's mind, which is that we basically just assume after being with someone for 10 years, kids, romantic partner, or friends, that we know what they like. Movies come out every Friday or every Thursday, and we can look and we can X things out and check things off without ever talking to them, knowing what movies they want to see. In terms of people that we meet, we can say to ourselves, this is someone my partner would like, and this is someone my partner wouldn't like. And that preconceived notion that we can easily categorize likes, dislikes, interests, and what they would pay attention to and what they would be interested in is what leads to the downfall of relationships. And I think that beginner's mindset, which is that you don't know, because every movie is a little bit different. Every person's a little bit different. And once we start categorizing, boxing, and labeling what other people think and do and what they're like without actually asking questions and collecting information, we are essentially not living in that relationship. We are attaching ourselves to our past notions of how we think these people are and what we think our relationship is like. And we're still evolving. Other people are still evolving. And so just as you said before about, listen, I want to invest in companies that have founders that have deprivation sensitivity. I would say that you also want to invest in founders that assume that they know less than they actually do and are comfortable pleading ignorance, the need for more information, that even though I've spent 20 years in this area, I'm still trying to figure it out. Those are the kind of bits of data of a founder that I would want to hear, because, listen, in a VUCA world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, I don't want to be with founders who think that they have the answers in an environment that's constantly changing.
Yeah, that's attitude. I suppose, I'm going to try and bring it a full circle. I believe you're fond of an expression, curiosity creates serendipity.
Yeah.
And I think that, back to this notion of boredom and beginner's mind, if we really do look at it from, with curious eyes, with fresh eyes, that serendipity is going to provide the novelty and the interest. And that's the thing that's going to, not to mention the social capital, that's the thing that's going to create that bond, that relationship bond. At least it seems to me.
Yeah. I mean, shared novel experiences is really probably the best medicine for long-term relationships, whether it's coworkers, children, parents, romantic partners, friendships. I mean, it's shared novel experiences. I mean, you went traveling with your family this over the summer. I went to Japan with my daughter. This is why people have retreats in business organizations, is in the hope that this actually happens. Cross-country trips. Those people get stuck in our lives and can never be excised, because no matter good, bad, or horrendous, those experiences are so powerful. There's so much novelty. And I think that as we become adults, we really start to remove these shared novel opportunities and experiences with people in our lives. And if there's, one of dozens of takeaways of this conversation, it's that start to inject novelty with great intention, even though it's actually a little bit of a hassle. Like, purposely try to make things a little bit more confusing and novel and throw them into your lives, because those opportunities for growth offer more rewards than almost anything else that you can do with your free time.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about some of the personal benefits of curiosity, right? I think there's a lot.
The science is increasing rapidly. I mean, one of my favorite ones is the fact is all of us, hopefully, the vast majority of us will be living a lot longer than our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, just because of physical health, exercise, nutrition. As we live longer, our brains are not designed to live past the age of 45. And so we are going to experience cognitive decline. All of us are. I mean, I have an iPhone app. I have Google Keep on my iPhone, where I actually, with great embarrassment, have a cheat sheet of all the names of parents and all my kids' soccer teams, because I just can't retain names anymore. And as soon as I tell people, everyone starts copying me and having their own cheat sheets of like, oh my God, such a good idea. Our working memory starts to go down a little bit. What we found, well, not me, what other scientists have found is that engaging in novel activities on a regular basis, and this could just be playing video games on a regular basis on your computer system. It could be Sudoku. It could be if you're the type of person that's extremely extroverted, lots of social interactions with, new, strange, interesting characters. Just people that are more curious. They show a slower decline in cognitive functioning over time. And there is preliminary evidence that being a curious person and engaging in curious moments may stave off some of these degenerative brain diseases such as Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And this is a really promising area as aging becomes a more important element as we live longer. We got to take this really seriously, is that focusing on the familiar is going to just speed up cognitive decline as we go into our 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
You literally have to remember to be curious, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I've been, doing this for so long is the science is just overwhelming, is that this strength has power in terms of your physical health. It's a little bit different than some of the other virtues that have been talked about since ancient Greece and Rome.
Totally. And besides, I mean, I know I'm going to put words in your mouth here. I think you've said it, that besides brain degeneration, there's things like hypertension and diabetes. There's other things that curiosity benefit, has health benefits or, are pointed to.
Yeah. So if you go back to, not only is curiosity about lust for the new, but do I believe that I can manage the anxiety of confronting the new it's just like doing high intensity interval training, in your workouts, mm-hmm. which is, 5 minutes at full speed, 5 minutes of rest, 5 minutes full speed. 15 minutes is all you need. At the same way, as you engage in these anxiety-provoking new experiences, you are training your physiology to be more adept at managing that increased heart rate and blood pressure. And so you are going to, there's good theory to suggest that these are some of the things that could stave off some of the the cardiovascular problems that people end up developing as they get older.
Yeah, you're increasing your zone of resilience there. I know in other discussions that curiosity correlates with intelligence, right? At least to some extent.
Yeah. So one of my colleagues, Stephanie Van Strom in London, she talks about 3 pillars of success towards goals. And those three pillars are conscientiousness, recently renamed and remarketed as grit, intelligence.
Thank you, Angela
and
Duckworth.
then, yeah, exactly, who's done amazing work. And then curiosity. Of those three, grittiness, intellect, and curiosity, only one of those three has received almost no attention, and that's curiosity.
Yeah.
All our entire mandatory schooling system revolves around cognitive ability or intellect. Grittiness has just been added to the equation. The reason that every parent on the planet should have their kids in sports is because it teaches them the life lessons of perseverance and facing obstacles and being resilient. So that element is taken care of by sports and working. And then the curiosity piece is the one that it requires a little bit more intention. And our society has not been engineered well to focus on novelty as much as it is about stability and safety. And if you think about some of the recent trends about trigger warnings and safe spaces and helicopter parenting, unfortunately, we're moving further and further away from creating a society, especially in the United States, where curious exploration is rewarded, because those of us that are kids from the 80s know that we basically raised ourselves. And I mean, I remember as a kid when I was 11, as opposed to my kids, I would ride for 15, 20, 30 miles just to find some UCDs. And my parents and grandparents had no freaking idea where I was. We were going over highways, and my kids have never crossed a highway in their entire lives, walking or bikes at age 11.
Yeah, some parents would get sent to jail for that by now. But guess what? I do believe that pendulum is swinging back, because as we're raising a generation of people that are uncertain about risks, that are don't have experience, those people's abilities and scopes are narrowing, and I think we're gonna find that those people are not going to be equipped. So I expect the pendulum to swing back. So all right, this is the last question before the final three questions, and everyone who listens to the podcast knows about the final three questions. So obviously I like to be around curious people. I like to invest in founders that have healthy curiosity. My question is, how do I spot these people? Right? I understand that you can know in 5 minutes whether or not you've got a curious explorer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of key indicators. I mean, one of them is, and I think everyone who's listening knows this from every barbecue you've had, when the night ends and you do a postmortem with your roommates or your partner, and talk about like, hey, did they ask you any questions at all over the course of the day? I mean, they were talking a lot. They were interesting. They were telling a lot of cool stories. And you find that a lot of people just don't ask any questions. And you can't just ask a question. It's about, are you receptive and open to the answer? Mm-hmm. And so one of the big indicators of curious people is not whether they ask questions, but do they ask questions to keep the conversation moving forward as you're answering the first question, right? So, the typical scenario is you travel to Santorini and you're showing me pictures and you're talking about what it's like to ride a donkey up a hill, on this island. And what's the first thing that I do after 5 minutes of talking to you? I tell you that I went to Santorini, and I completely, railroad your story with my previous experience. And it becomes a battle of two alpha males about who had the best vacation. Curious people do something different, which is that they hold back on their experiences to kind of expand upon yours. And basically, the term that psychologists have used for this is called capitalization support. The idea is I'm going to capitalize on your sharing of a positive experience by showing enthusiasm and interest. And because of that, you are going to flesh out details that you weren't even expecting to do. Mm-hmm. A great indicator of a curious person.
Yeah. And I think you're even, maybe not intentionally, but you're highlighting the notion of that builds social capital, right? When someone believes that they're actually being listened to actively, they then want to, they go further in trying to please, and they go further in trying to be helpful. And so you've created it, just purely by taking stuff in, you've created the beginnings of a longer interaction, which, by all means, seems like it ought to be a good thing. Anything else that you can think of off the top of your head in terms of recognize them? I'm the people that I know, they're all animated as all get out. They talk with their hands and they're very excited and they'll talk to you about anything and what they did yesterday. And that seems to me one that I just notice.
Yeah. Yes. And at the same time, it can often be an indicator of people's neuroticism, right? Anxious people tend to be extremely animated as well. For me, it's playfulness, right? This is something that often disappears as people get older. They get a little more serious and somber. And so whether it's wordplay, whether it ends up being like sarcasm, whether it ends up being physical contact as you're talking, just jostling people if you're in Australia, taking the piss out of people. These are all elements of curious people, which is that, listen, I have a level of fascination and intrigue in you, and I want you to know this, and I'm going to express this by knocking you off the swing, just like I did with the person I was attracted to when I was in kindergarten. So that's an element of kind of curious people, that playfulness.
Yeah. Well, look, I will tell you that I didn't even ask you half the questions, but I'm looking at the clock and I know that we've got to go. So I'm diving into the final three questions, which, like I said, means we're at the end. The first one is, despite the fact that there's a whole bunch of questions that I didn't ask, is there something in particular about the topic that you think we should address, to kind of wrap up or make sure it's included in this conversation?
I think I just want to double down on the fact is, while this is a complicated psychological strength, and I wanted to purposely show it's more sophisticated than people typically think it is. Mm-hmm. One of the important things is we found that this is malleable. People can change at almost any age, but they typically don't do. We typically become, over time, the curmudgeon on our block, where you kick the kickball over their fence and then they keep them all underneath in their basement. We tend to become a little bit more closed off and less open to experiences as we get older. And so hopefully these kind of conversations will prevent that from actually happening. Yeah. But we can become more curious, and that's not the case for every personality trait.
It's back to will, back to just the desire to be, being volitional.
Right.
Okay. The next question is, I assume, as prolific as you are, that you have people that pay attention to your work on a consistent basis. Where can the people who listen to this podcast find you on a consistent basis?
The best way to ask me questions or ask for information, and I'm the most responsive, is on Twitter. Mm-hmm. So my handle is just my name, Todd Kashdan, TODDKASHDAN. Because I have a weird last name, there's only one famous Kashdan in the world, my great uncle. If you just put Kashdan in Google, you'll find my website, toddkashdan.com. And I put all of my articles up that are available for free, and all the measures that I've created, they're all available for free for download.
Nice. And you broke new ground telling us about the HBR article, but okay, so we've got the book and we've got the stay tuned for this article. And probably by the time this podcast comes out, that article will already be out. But any other materials that you recommend for the curious out there besides your book?
You mean for book recommendations other than my own work?
Not necessarily book, papers, studies, whatever you think that someone who wants to dig into this a little bit more and take it a little more seriously.
Yeah, so I have a collaborator who I have a fanboy crush on as well, Paul Sylvia. Mm-hmm. He's at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Like me, he gives away all of his papers for free online. His last name is spelled Silvia. And he does amazing work on creativity and curiosity, and it's the reason that we've been friends and working together for over 10 years. So look him up, and for me, I'm right now I'm working on my next book, which is I'm not doing too much reveal about it, but essentially it's about how to how do we get minority voices, people that are refusing to agree with the status quo because the status quo is wrong, is problematic? How do we get those voices to be heard? And how do we get people to be open to listening to them? So that's the book that I'm working on right now.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty lofty topic.
Yeah, it's taken a while.
Okay. Dr. Kashdan, I think we should end. I want to thank you very much. Your time and insight is very valuable. I enjoyed it personally. I think this is helpful for everyone listening. So thanks so much.
No, thank you. And thanks for stepping up and being a good enough dad that everyone wants to be like you, taking their kids to U2 for their first concert.
Wow, I didn't realize the points that I scored there. That's awesome. Okay. Thanks very much. This has been Intangibles. As always, I'd like to thank Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com for being the sponsor this season and a supportive partner. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. I'd also like to thank Ben Glowy, our sound engineer. If you would like to work with him, he can be reached via Twitter. His handle is @venture_sound. And thank you. Keep an eye out for the next episode. I'm your host, Steve BERG.